Hey, friends, let's talk for a moment about Africa. And counter to what you may have heard in certain ag circles, why this continent is not likely to become an agricultural customer of the United States of any consequence, and it's not going to answer our surplus problems of production that we face here in American agriculture. What am I talking about? Well, I go to ag meetings and speak on stage at ag meetings all over the country and even up in Canada sometimes. And what do I hear at some meetings is we just need a replacement to China. Because for years, what our answer was, places like Canada, the United States, we are export-driven agricultural economies because we're so good at production, and we have been since post-World War II. Our business model was essentially produce the stuff and then find a ship and find a country that can take our stuff because they need our agricultural output. We're good at making stuff. They're not. They're hungry. They need our stuff. That worked until about 40 years ago. And then starting sometime after the grain embargo of 1979 and then the run-up in our productive capacity, we started seeing these issues in the last 40 years, and we were oversupplied. Then came the Chinese juggernaut, and I talk about this in my global series here of the Business of Agriculture short takes, if you will. And that's why I'm talking about Africa right now, because many folks think Africa could become the next China. Because China, since the year 2000 or late 90s, his economy has gone up by massive amounts. Manufacturing, 8, 10, 11% GDP economic expansion every year, but it's slowing down. And they're starting to lose population. And they don't want to be a customer of the United States. So it's not unnatural for us to say, well, what about India? They're a big country with 1.4 billion people. Maybe they become the new China. India's historically been very difficult to deal with, doesn't stick to their negotiated, much like China doesn't. And also, 2/3 of Indians are vegan. Not really good for us on our beef and our pork and our chicken. And also, they don't need a lot of our grains to feed animals if they're not going to eat them themselves. So that leaves Africa. The next answer, of course, we hear this all the time at different, not all the time, we hear it sometimes at ag meetings. Let's just maybe make Africa the new China. I'm going to tell you why that's a fundamentally flawed idea. First off, China is one country with one iron-fisted communist government that essentially put a capitalistic business model in place, extracting technology and institutional knowledge from the rest of the world that wanted that marketplace and grew. Africa is not one country. It's a continent with 54 countries, 54 different governments. And that's unless you count tribal governments. Within each of those countries, sometimes there's tribal governments that spat and have civil wars. So you've got a lack of infrastructure. There's not a bunch of ports. There's a massive continent right here with a lot of highways, no railroads, or very few. So you've got that going against it. Here's the other thing. China's economy afforded them to be a customer of global agriculture. Africa doesn't have anywhere close to that economy. Let me give you some numbers. The total world economy is worth $117 trillion as of the end of 2025 when I'm filming this. The United States represents 26% of that at $31 trillion. In other words, the United States, with only 4% of the global population, is 26% of the GDP. Guess what? Africa is less than 3% of the entire global economy. Less than 3%. At around 2.5%, $3 trillion. Give you some other comparisons, though. Canada, $2.3 trillion. Mexico, $2 trillion. In other words, little old Canada with 40 million people has almost as big of an economy as the entire continent of Africa. Maybe our best bet, Mexico, 130 million residents, as opposed to 1.5 billion residents over here in Africa, has $2 trillion of GDP. In other words, Canada and Mexico together are 50% more of an economy than the entire continent of Africa. Maybe our better bet as a North American agricultural producer or commentator, economist, is to just look right here and cultivate a better trade agreement right here with customers who actually have ascending economies, who can become customers. In Africa, the 1.5 billion people, 40% of them, 600 million residents, don't even have electricity. You tell me if they're going to be customers of buying U.S. pork or U.S. beef or U.S. poultry or even U.S. corn and soy to feed their own herds and flocks because they don't even have electricity, let alone there's the processing issue. Not being mean, I'm being honest. If you believe that Africa is going to be a replacement to China, you're smoking something that I don't know where you're growing it. But you know what? It ain't going to happen. It's never going to happen in your lifetime or my lifetime, just being frank. We've got much better opportunities in front of us to find countries that actually can be customers, and it's not likely to happen in the bulk of the 54 countries in Africa. I'm Damian Mason. I speak all over North America and right here online about the world's most important industry, the business of agriculture. This is one of my global series. Thank you for tuning in.